Welcome to Chapter 7, Cognitive Development. So in this chapter, we will look at the following learning questions. There will be a total of 3 videos for this chapter. So a couple of the videos will be a little bit longer than normal. The first video is going to look at Piaget's cognitive development theory. The second video will be a little bit shorter and look at the theory of core knowledge, as well as Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. And the third video will look at information processing, which includes attention, memory, executive function, metacognition, and other things. And then there'll be just a brief comparison at the end of Piaget and Vygotsky at the end of video 3. So let's begin video 1, where we'll look at Piaget's theory of cognitive development. So if I haven't, mentioned it already, I may have talked about it a little bit back in the first chapter, but Piaget came up with this incredibly detailed theory of how thinking develops throughout childhood and into adolescence. And before Piaget's theory, there really was very little research done on children's thinking. It was kind of assumed that children just, gain knowledge year after year and become more like adults as they get more knowledge. And what Piaget, showed was that it wasn't at all like just gaining more knowledge, and that what he demonstrated in his theory was that children at different ages, think completely differently in many ways, and that skills develop, and in different modes of thinking develop over time to change the way that we think, and that it wasn't just a case of adding on a little bit more knowledge year after year. So this was a monumental theory. He really started the whole area in psychology of cognitive development. It kind of his theory led to tons of more research in the area. Thousands of research studies after were inspired by his theory. Literally thousands. Okay, and I mean, we still talk about his theory after over, it's been more than 50 years since he came up with a theory, probably closer to 70 years or so. But anyways, let's go through a few of the basics here. I want to point out before I start that there are a number of videos available on Blackboard in the other videos folder that deal with Piaget's theory in the various stages. So I do recommend that you watch those videos. I can't necessarily cover everything in this lecture, so and also, of course, read the chapter. So let's begin. And his theory provides a set of basic principles of cognitive development to begin with. One principle that Piaget pointed out was that intelligence is an active, constructive, and dynamic process. What he pointed out and had seen in his observations of children was that children are active learners. We're not just filling their heads by giving them information. They are learning on their own, and he stressed this in his theory that they actively construct knowledge themselves. They learn about the world by being little scientists and experimenting with things. It might just be like throwing different objects down the stairs or something to see how they bounce and react, and how they sound differently. But he noticed that they're constantly learning on their own. One other thing that was prominent in his studies of children was that he noticed that by studying the mistakes that children make, it gives you insight into how they are thinking. And this was an important part of his research, looking at the errors or mistakes that children make, and knowing that this tells you something about their thought process. Why is it that all children at this age, make a similar kind of mistake? Well, they must be thinking in a different way than an older child. And also, as children develop, the structure of their thinking changes, and these new modes of thought are based on the earlier structures. He kind of showed how thinking develops, from one stage to another, and that we build up on what we previously learned, and we add new ways of thinking in each stage. Okay. The real basic unit of Piaget's theory, kind of at the core of his theory, is the idea of the schema. And as it says here, schemas are cognitive frameworks that place concepts, objects, or experiences into categories or groups of associations. So you can think schemas. You think of schemas as mental concepts. They're mental concepts of first of all, of things. So, for instance, objects. I mean, I have a mental concept of what a chair is. We have mental concepts of people. We refer to them as stereotypes, but a stereotype is a schema. It's like a concept you have about a group of people. We have concepts of animals, schemas of animals. So I have a schema of what a dog is or what a cat is. Okay, so we have schemas of things like objects, people, and animals. We have schemas of events. So, for instance, I'm sure you all have a going to a restaurant schema in your head, so that when you go to a brand new restaurant, you don't walk in and say, "I wonder what's going to happen," and like go in and wait for some unexpected thing to happen. I mean, you go in with an expectation that you're gonna wait to be seated. They're gonna sit you down. You're gonna get a menu. You're gonna order food. And that there's a certain sequence that will be followed. Sure, it's possible that some certain restaurants might vary the sequence a little bit. Maybe they don't give you a menu. Maybe they have it on the wall or something. But there's a basic sequence, and so you go in to a brand new restaurant already knowing what to expect. So it's not like you're learning a brand new experience from scratch, because you use your schema. Okay, so events. We also have schemas of actions. So early in life, an infant develops a sucking schema. For instance, remember when an infant is born, they have a sucking reflex. So initially, it's not under their control, but after a couple of months, they gain control, voluntary control of the sucking action, and so it becomes a schema, meaning that when they want to suck, they activate their schema, and it produces the motion of sucking. A baby will also develop a dropping schema. Initially, they'll be holding something and just drop it accidentally, but after a while, they'll get to a point where they can purposely drop something. I want to drop this block now, and they'll let go and it'll drop. I mean, like, it doesn't seem like much of an action, but we all have it. I mean, we all know how to drop an object purposely. Well, you do it by activating your schema, your action schema. As that child gets a little older, they're going to develop a throwing schema. Instead of dropping, now they know how to throw something across the room. And so we have schemas for all the actions we know. And then finally, we also have schemas for ideas. I have a schema for what democracy is. It's not a thing, it's not a person, it's not an event, but it's a mental concept or an idea. And I have a schema for it. I have a schema for fairness. I have a schema for justice, excuse me, and other concepts like that. Maybe I have a schema for socialism. I don't know. Um, anyways, those are also schemas. It's kind of your set of ideas. When you think about that concept, what becomes active in your mind. So schemas can be, just to repeat the categories, they can be things, they can be events, they can be actions, they can be ideas. Okay. As it says here, when we can fit new experiences easily into our pre-existing schemas, we engage in assimilation. So we constantly want to use the schemas we already have in order to make sense of the world. Like I said, like you use your going to a restaurant schema when you walk into a brand new restaurant. It helps you make sense of that new environment. And so we're constantly using our schemas to interpret um, experiences in the world. When I see a brand new dog that I've never seen before, I already, I just called it a dog because I can recognize it's a dog because I use my schema, even though I've never seen this particular animal, you know, but it's like close enough to other dogs. I see that it has 4 legs, it has fur, it barks, it's got a tail, like it fits the category. So as we come across new things and new experiences in the world, we constantly assimilate the new experiences with our existing set of schemas. So we could say that assimilation is absorbing new experiences into current knowledge structures. You absorb the new experience into your current knowledge structure to make sense of it. A young child, if you think about a toddler or a preschooler, the first time that toddler comes across a skunk, it's not surprising to think that many children, the first time they see a skunk, think it's a cat because they're probably more familiar with cats. They probably have a cat schema, if they've had some experience with cats. And so when they see the skunk, it doesn't really fit their dog schema, and so the cat schema becomes active, and they think, well, okay, it's close to a cat. It must be a cat. So you can certainly make mistakes with assimilation, and certainly we see errors with children all the time because they have an underdeveloped set of schemas initially. Think about a very young child coming across her mother's pills the first time. What do you think she thinks the pills are? Well, they look pretty close to being like candy. If this child's had experience with candies, they have a candy schema, little round and oval, colorful things. I mean, like they would initially often think that pills are candies. So this is how assimilation works. You use what you know to make sense of what you don't know, and that's why, like, first time you take a young child to the zoo, half the animals in there they call dogs. They'll see a tiger and say, "Well, that's a big dog," or a big, because they don't have a schema for tiger, for instance. They'll be like, so they use what they know to interpret the new experiences. One more example would be calling a butterfly a bird. Let's say a child's become familiar with birds. Their schema includes the fact that it flies and that has wings. Then they see a butterfly. Hey, it flies. It has wings. So they would possibly call it a bird. Okay. Now, when they make some of these mistakes, they're going to be corrected. If there's an adult around or somebody that to correct them. I mean, so when that little child thinks that the mother's pills are candies, and if the mother sees that, she's obviously going to, grab those pills away and teach the child how dangerous they are and that they're certainly not candies, and she'll describe, that these are pills that are for adults. You don't touch them. You never ever have one. And so this would cause what Piaget called it a state of disequilibrium. It's a state of confusion when your schemas do not fit your experiences. So they look like candies. Now they're being told they're not candies. This will cause a disequilibrium in that young child. Because now they don't, you know, they can't interpret um, what these pills are, based on the current knowledge. Um, what the child will want to do then is engage in what's called equilibration, which is an attempt to resolve cognitive uncertainty to return to a comfortable state. A comfortable state meaning like I feel like I understand everything, around me. I understand my experiences. Um, Part of the equilibration efforts will involve accommodation. And the accommodation is when we need to change our schemas to fit our new experiences. When we realize that we're wrong, that we can't correctly interpret the world based on our current knowledge. So we accommodate. And so accommodation is altering a belief to make it more compatible with your experience. And so I'm going to return to that bird example. So that child sees a butterfly, says, "Oh, there's an interesting bird because it flies and it has wings." Parent corrects the child, says, "No, no, no, that's not a bird. That's a different type of flying animal. It's called a butterfly." So this child goes through some disequilibrium. Oh wait, my schema said it was a bird, so maybe I need to adjust my current schemas. And so the accommodation happens as the child, first of all, perhaps they would adjust their bird schema. Um, Maybe now they include that birds have beaks, because they might notice that a bird has a beak and a butterfly doesn't. Or the parent might even point that out. Look, it doesn't have a beak for one thing, and that's what makes it different. And so now they add that to their current schema, of birds. They fly, they have wings, and they have beaks. And then they would also want to create a new schema. Okay, they create a butterfly schema. It has wings, it flies, but it has no beak. And this is the way that schemas develop over time. So when Piaget talks about cognitive development, it's what's happening in the background throughout all of cognitive development is that you're constantly updating and refining your schemas over time to make them more accurate and more, so that they more accurately represent the world. So little adjustments, day after day to the schemas through this accommodation process. Now, if no one corrects it, these children, they will continue to, make the same mistakes. I mean, you can go through years of life, believing something that's wrong, especially as a child. I mean, maybe, a child goes years think every time they see a skunk, they think it's a cat, until somebody really sits down and says, "Okay, no, I need to correct you." And okay. So once again, schemas, they're the basic building blocks of everything you know. It's really how you categorize all of your knowledge of the world. So when I was talking about those categories of things and events and actions and ideas, it's really everything you know. Like, all of your experiences, all of your knowledge are stored in these schemas, and you use them to make sense of the world and to live live day after day. Okay. Piaget proposed 4 stages in his theory. They're listed here. Each stage, in each stage, the child has a specific way of looking at the world. And, at least in the first few stages, they also have limitations in each stage. This is back to the idea of Piaget noticing what kinds of mistakes they make. What can't they do that older children can do? So he talked a lot about the limitations at each stage. And This is a stage theory, meaning that Piaget felt that children kind of go through a discontinuous leap, meaning that they'll reach a certain point where their mind is matured enough, and they'll kind of leap from one stage to the next, and their thinking will drastically change in every area. So um, I don't know what an example might be. Maybe a child regularly makes mistakes in addition, um, and like even like they make mistakes in almost every kind of addition problem they see. Like they're kind of missing some basic logic about what's supposed to be happening. And then they make a shift to a new stage, and all of a sudden they can solve all the addition problems. Like they don't just like learn to solve one type and then and I'm talking about types of addition. I mean, there aren't really a lot of types, but you could talk about addition of single numbers, or two-digit numbers, or addition where you have to carry a number, and so there are a few different types. But all of a sudden, it's like as their thinking changes, all of a sudden they go from making common mistakes over and over to solving them all, because they've made the leap from one stage to another. Okay, that might not be the best example, but I think you get the point. Um, and so this is the idea I talked about back in the first chapter of the tadpole to the frog, that it's a discontinuous change where you don't just the tadpole doesn't become more tadpole, it becomes something completely different. And that's what Piaget proposed, that a 9-year-old is not just smarter than a 3-year-old because they have more knowledge, they think differently. Okay, let's take a look at the 4 stages. You can see the ages listed here. So we'll start with the sensory motor stage from birth to 2 years. And in the stage, young children gain information through their senses and through their motor skills. It's focused on the here and now, basically. So it is, it's called sensory motor. I mean, they're using their senses to learn about the world. And they also use motor skills. They learn to pick up objects. They eventually learn to crawl and to walk, so they can move about in the environment, and when they can start picking objects up, it's a whole new way to examine the world. And so there's not a lot of mental activity. Then there's no logic at all. In the first 2 years of life, it's just about using your senses and your motor skills to just gain information about the world. And when I say it's focused on the here and now, I mean, a 1-year-old is not thinking about some place that they were visited the day before. I mean, they're thinking about wherever they are. I'm in my bedroom. They're thinking about their bedroom, or they're thinking about the objects that they can see in their bedroom. They're not thinking about something they saw, yesterday, or something they're not thinking about something that's in another room. I mean, they're thinking about what they can see and touch, and what they can currently hear, and things like that. Okay, so that's kind of what I meant by here and now. There's focused on what's in their immediate vicinity. Now, there's a number of shifts that happen from the start to the end of the stage that are kind of listed here. So once again, this is from birth to the age of 2. So children shift from reflexes initially. Remember, when you're born, you have a lot of reflexive actions, and then eventually they develop goal-directed activity with a purpose. So they learn to do purposeful behaviors by the end of the stage. And remember, like, those reflexes were not purposeful at all. So when I talked about the sucking schema, initially they suck whatever goes in the mouth, even if it's a finger, doesn't matter if any milk's coming out. And then after a while, when they gain control and they can do goal-directed activity, they can decide, oh, I want to suck on this nipple now that's in front of me, or I'm not hungry, I'm going to turn my mouth away. Okay. Their focus moves from the body to the outside world as they progress to the end of this stage. So once again, as I said, it starts with the here and now, what's right in front of them. By the time they get to 2, they're starting to form mental representations. I'll talk about that in the next stage. They start forming mental representations so that they can think about things that aren't right in front of them. One of the key developments in this stage is the development of object permanence. Piaget placed this at the end of the first year of life, between about 8 and 12 months. We'll see some evidence in the next video, that more current evidence showing that it probably happens earlier than what Piaget imagined. But he was the first one to even understand this concept, in that it had to develop. Object permanence refers to knowing that an object still exists even when it's out of sight. And I want to show you a couple of videos. And these videos will demonstrate the basic technique that Piaget used to test for object permanence. And what we're going to look at is 2 twins. So they're identical twins, exactly the same age. And one of them has developed object permanence and the other one doesn't. And you will see just how different their reactions are. Okay, so let's roll this video. Right away, she picks up the blanket with the object. It's hidden, but look, she knows it's there. I mean, that seems like a natural reaction. Well, it's hidden, but she's not go under it, and she knows it's still there. And she certainly has lots of people. This was the basic task that Piaget used. Okay, let's take a look at her sister. I'm just getting it loaded up here. Where is it? Okay, just give me 1 second. Oh, here it is. Okay. So this is Zoe. Watch the difference. Underneath there, she wanted it. Oh, it's gone. It's out of existence. You can tell that she does not have object permanence. Now, one thing you do is you make sure that they still want it by just showing them a little bit. And right away she goes for it. Yep. She really wanted it, but she didn't know it was there until she could see it. I mean, she almost had it, but she doesn't see it. Makes no effort to retrieve it. Once again, she shows her a little bit. And this just shows she's certainly capable of reaching and picking it up. Really wants those boobs. Oh, they're gone. try coming up. Well, she's already got it. No, gone. So she settles for the blanket. Okay, so that is the concept of object permanence. Okay, back to our slideshow. And finally, they move from action to mental representation. I started to talk about this already. That I mean, early in life, everything is trial and error. You know, trial and error action. You know, the child will, I mean, even something as simple as trying to pick something up, though initially they're not very good at their action. They don't have good action schemas, and they'll swipe at something and miss it. You know, like they have trouble like even placing their arm in the right place or their hand in the right place to pick something up, and they don't have the ability to grasp early in life, and so like there's a lot of trial and error that goes on. Just you know, the infant trying to do something and often failing, and there's no evidence of planning. By the end of this 2-year stage, you will see that certainly a 2-year-old can think ahead, mentally think ahead before acting. So they will pause a little bit and you know to think about what they want to do, and then they'll do it rather than just launching right into action immediately. And this shows that you know by the end of the stage that they start to develop mental representation, meaning that they can represent the problem or the situation, you know, mentally to think about it briefly before they act. And so this moves us into the next stage. This idea of mental representation is really kind of key development by the end of this first stage. And it moves, it's what shifts you into the second stage of thinking, which is called the pre-operational stage. It is called pre-operational because operations refer to mental things that you do mentally. So like if you add 2 plus 2 in your head, you just performed an operation. So it's kind of like, you know, you can think of it a little bit like using some mental logic, or maybe logic isn't the right word, but you're mentally thinking about things, once again, without just doing trial and error action. And in order to do that, when we think about operations, I mean, it's not just mentally representing things, but it's performing some kind of mental action. Sorry, I kind of got I kind of got on the wrong path there for a little bit, but because I was talking about operations, I started to talk about this stage. Okay, operations are like are logical mental actions. So 2 plus 2 is a logical mental action. You're performing a mental logical step to find an answer. Okay, so in the pre-operational stage, they can mentally represent, meaning they can think about things, but they cannot yet perform any logic on them. That's really what I wanted to say. So pre-operational, they can mentally represent the world, and they can think about things that aren't in front of them, but they cannot yet perform operations, meaning logical steps on their representations. So the major accomplishment of this stage here, the pre-operational stage, is that they've acquired the ability to represent actions mentally rather than physically. And representing actions or representing objects is a huge step. So when a child does something like, let's say they tell you about an apple that they ate when they were at daycare, So they're home now, and they said, I was at daycare and the teacher gave me an apple and I ate it and it was good. I mean, they are using a mental representation to talk about that apple. The child before the age of 2 can't do that. Um, they don't form those lasting representations to think about things that aren't there. So a child talking about things that have already happened, or talking about things that aren't present, that means that they're using a mental representation. And that's what's changed between the first stage and this one. They can now think about things that aren't present. When mommy's at work, they can say mommy's at work. They know that she still exists. They know that she's coming home later. Um, they know that they don't have to worry because mommy goes to work every day, and they have these representations that this is normal. Okay. One of the ways that you see that children are using mental representations is that this this is the stage where pretend play starts, um, and children are constantly pretending that one thing represents another. So, like children, um, I know there's one video. If you watch the videos, there's one where a kid puts on, a jacket, and um, he's now what was it? Oh, he becomes a spy. So he makes believe he's a spy because he put his jacket on. And or when children, they show them building a castle using blocks, and the blocks are representing bricks and the walls of the castle. I mean, they're pretending it's a castle. They're not just saying I'm building blocks on top of each other. I mean, it represents something. There's no castle in the room, but they have it in their minds what a castle is. Or a child picks up a piece of plastic and pretends it's a phone, let's say, and they talk into it. This is a phone. I'm talking to my daddy, and like, that's a using a mental representation. So this is opening up a whole new way of thinking. They think about things that aren't present in the here and now. Okay. In this stage, children do not yet have logical thought, which is what I was kind of talking about before. Instead, they think often magically and egocentrically. Um, one one way that they kind of demonstrate magical thinking is that they'll say they might believe, for instance, that the clouds are alive, and they'll say, it might be raining, and a young child in this stage might think that the clouds are sad because it's raining, or or they might say something like, "Don't hit that tree; it's going to hurt the tree." I mean, I know trees are alive, but um, obviously a tree doesn't feel pain the same way that a human does. But so one of the things, this is called animism, which is like giving human or animal qualities to things that aren't alive or that don't have those qualities. So pretending a rock has feelings, for instance. Um, anyways, and you'll see this like in preschool. Preschool children will bump into a fridge and say sorry to the fridge or something like that, which is kind of like magical thinking. Right? Remember, a lot of children at this age are believing in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy and things like that. I'll get to egocentrism, how they think egocentrically in a moment. So Piaget talked about 3 limitations um, that characterize this stage. Once again, these are, where do they make mistakes? What, how do they think differently that causes mistakes, compared to older children? One thing they do is they use intuitive thought to try to figure out the world. So their intuitive thought means that their reasoning is influenced by their perceptions rather than by any form of logic. So if I'm in a room and I say, look, I can turn off the light by snapping my fingers, and really operating a switch with my other hand, and every time I snap my fingers, I flick the switch, and the child's going to believe, oh, I'm really controlling the lights with by snapping my fingers. Um, um, whereas an older child would say, well, wait a sec, yeah, actually, there probably are lights that you can snap your fingers and turn on now. I'm just thinking, but it might not be a good present example, but before we had lights that you could clap and turn on or snap your fingers and turn on. I mean, you would never, an older person or child would never think, yes, he can really turn lights on by snapping his fingers. So, but a young child would, in this stage, would, because that's just how it appears. So how something appears kind of guides how they think things work. They have no, logic beyond their basic perceptions. So what they see, they basically believe. So you refer to that as intuitive thought. It's the way it looks, so it makes sense to them. Egocentrism. This is when a child sees everything from their own viewpoint, and they have an inability to consider situations from other people's viewpoints. I'll mention a couple of examples. One's from Piaget's own research. There was an example I read about where he asked one little girl who did have, like, this little girl had a sister. And he asked her, do you have a sister? And she said yes. And then he asked, does your sister have a sister? And she said, oh, no, she doesn't have a sister. And obviously she was her sister's sister, but she couldn't see it from her sister's point of view that she would be a sister to her sister. Okay. Anyways, that was a case of egocentrism. She could see that she would, she had a sister, but her sister didn't. But anyways, some other examples. Think about how children hide. Preschoolers, they cover their eyes whenever they hide. So a preschooler might just go up against a tree in full view. They'll face the tree and cover their eyes. And the reason is, if they can't see you, they believe that they're hidden. So it's from their own viewpoint, even though they're in full sight. Or they just cover they're in the middle of the room, they cover their head with a blanket. Now they can't see you, they think they're hidden because they can't see you, so you can't see them. So it's from their own viewpoint. They can't think, oh, wait a sec, it's going to look very different from somebody else. I'm going to look like a child with a blanket on his head. Okay, so the way that's one example of egocentrism. Another one that I like is, if you ever watch preschoolers talk on the phone, they often might hold things up. And the reason is they can see it themselves. So be like a child saying he's on the phone with grandma and says, Grandma, I got a new baseball mitt for Christmas. And he holds it up in front of his own eyes and says, this is what it looks like. and so it is, even though, obviously grandma can't see it. So, but he can. So it's all from your own viewpoint. Piaget tested egocentrism using something called the tree mountain task. I don't have a picture of it. I think there's one in the book, but basically there was 3 different mountains on this table display. Each one had something different on top. Like one of them had a little house on top, and one had a cross on top. I think the other one had snow on the top of the mountain, and they were different sizes. And anyways, like, if you walk around this table, this was displayed on table. If you walk around to each of the 4 sides of the table, you get a different viewpoint. And because the mountains are different sizes, like from certain viewpoints, you can't even see one of the mountains, or you can't see what's on top of it because it's blocked by the other ones. So what he would do is he would, have the children look at it from different sides, and then he had 4 pictures, one from each viewpoint from around the table, and he would have them they're standing on one side, and he would use a doll and say, look, this is, let's just call her Betty. This is Betty, and she's over on this side of the table. So he puts her on, one of the other three sides, and he says, what do the mountains look like from where she is? And you know what they always picked? They always picked whatever it looked like from the side that they were currently standing on. It was always, picking the one that they could see at this moment. It didn't matter where you put the doll. Okay. So that demonstrated egocentrism. Finally, one other limitation is that they have a lack of conservation skills. So conservation is the knowledge that just because the appearance of something changes, it doesn't mean the amount of it changes. And there's a number of different types of conservation. Just to list a few, there's conservation of volume, conservation of mass, conservation of number, conservation of length, and I think the conservation of weight. But anyways, the point is that this is a logical kind of skill, like to understand that if I have two balls of Play-Doh and they're like two round balls of Play-Doh and they're exactly the same size, and I ask the children, look, tell me, are these the same size? And the child says yes, and then I say, okay, watch, and I just push down one of the balls of Play-Doh into a flat pancake, and then I ask them, is there still the same amount of Play-Doh in both? And they'll say no. They'll pick one or the other one as having more. And they do this always based on one dimension. And this is what Piaget referred to as centration. CENTRATION. You want that term. So centration means focusing on only one aspect of a situation. So when I talk about the clay, like if I mash one down, they might say that the round one has more clay because it's higher. It doesn't matter that the other one's wider now. And they'll say, so they'll pick one thing like this one's higher, must have more. Sometimes they did a test where they would roll one of the balls of clay into like a big snake. So they make it really long, and they just kind of mash it into a big snake. And so some children would pick that one and say, that one has more because it's longer, and it doesn't matter, and other children might pick the ball and say that one has more because it's higher. I mean, it doesn't matter which one they pick. I mean, they both have the same, but they concentrate on one thing that's different, the height or the length, and they centrate on that. So centration means like they focus on just one dimension in order to determine, quantities. Let's look at a couple of examples in a video. This video is included in the other videos section, but I'm going to show it now just so we can see a couple of examples. And I just need to find it. Where would it be? Here. Yeah. Okay. This is called, this video is called Conservation Task. And
Can you look at these two glasses? Do you think that they have the same amount of juice? You think they have the same? Okay. Now we're going to pour this juice into this glass.
So this is one of his classic conservation tasks. Some people call it conservation of liquid. It's actually conservation of volume. But so the child agrees that both glasses have the same amount. All you do is pour one into a different size glass. You do it right in front of the child. They're watching you do it.
Now, do you think that this glass has more juice, this glass has more juice, or do you think that they have the same amount?
That one has more.
This one has more, and why do you think that this one has more?
Because it's taller.
Excuse me. So that was an example of centration. She said it had more because it was taller. She had just agreed that there was the same amount of liquid, but so there's no, you can see that there's a lack of basic logic here. That there's no way the liquid could become more or less than it used to be. But this is a somewhat older child. You will see this child solve the problem, and you'll see that this child talks about the width, the different widths of the glass. That one's thinner and skinnier.
So first we're going to look at these two cups right here. Do you think there's the same amount of juice in this glass as there is in that glass?
They're even.
They're even? Okay. So we're going to take the juice from this glass and pour it into this one right here.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to look at this glass and that one. So do you think that there's more juice in this glass, more juice in this glass, or do you think that they have the same amount?
Same amount.
Okay, why do you think that they have the same amount?
Just because this is skinny doesn't mean it's not the same amount. It has the same amount of juice in it, but this one is just wider and this one's skinnier, but they have the same amount of juice in it.
Okay, so that child, was talking about how one's wider and one's skinnier, and whereas the typical pre-operational child is always going to just pick whichever one's taller, whichever one's higher, and they all pick the skinnier glass because it's higher up, and so this, you can see that there's a different mode of thinking here as she solves the problem by and she had trouble explaining it, but she was getting there. This one, just because it's skinnier and it's good, that it looks different. But anyways, we're going to go back to some younger children again. This one's called confirmation of number.
Okay, you ready? Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or do they have the same?
1, 2, 3. Wait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're both the same.
They're the same?
5, 5.
Okay.
Once again, you do everything right in front of the child as they walk. You just lie them apart.
Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more, or do they have the same?
This one has more.
That one has more quarters?
Yeah.
Why does this row have more quarters?
Because it's more far away.
It's more far away?
Yeah, it's more far away than that. Looks bigger.
Okay, another example of centration. She picked the one that was spread apart because they were more far away. It's bigger. So she was looking at the length of the row quarters. So that must mean that there's more. Once again, she failed to confirm that the number of quarters couldn't change when they were just split apart. We'll see one more example here.
All right, we're going to play a game with the graham crackers, and we're going to share them between me and you, okay?
Okay.
Okay. Do you think that we shared those fairly?
No.
No, why not?
You have those and I have this one.
Well, what if we try this? Okay, can I put this down right there?
Okay.
Now is it fair?
Yeah.
Yeah, why is it fair now?
Because we both have two.
Okay.
Can you look at these two glasses? Do you think that they...
Okay. So you could see some more centration going on in that final example with the graham crackers. She centered on number. Didn't matter how big they were. That completely works with preschoolers. If anyone complains they don't have the same amount because they have less, number, just break them apart. Like if your older kid has 2 candy canes and the little one has 1 candy cane, just snap it in half, and now they have 2. and they will totally miss that the logic that they still have the same amount they used to, but because they can't conserve. Okay, so these are the limitations of pre-operational thinking. It's all these point to like a lack of logical mental abilities. Their minds are not yet operational to perform logic. Now we move into the concrete operational stage. By the way, in case you don't remember this second stage, the ages were 2 to 7. That's why I kept referring to them as preschoolers. Now we move to the third stage. This is from 7 to 12. So, these are mainly elementary school children and also middle school children. But in this stage, they now develop logical thinking, so their minds become operational, but they cannot think abstractly or hypothetically. This is why it's called concrete operations. Concrete meaning that their logic is tied to concrete objects or pictures or situations. They have to see it to perform logical operations. They have to have something in front of them. I mean, like whether it's pictures or objects. I'll give you one example. There is a task called, there's a logical task called transitive inference. Transitive inference. You might have learned about this before in a certain math class along the way. Anyways, transitive inference basically means that if A is greater than B, whether it's number or height or length, if A is greater than B and B is greater than C, then obviously A has to be greater than C. It's basic kind of logic. So that's called transitive inference. Somebody in this stage, they can use transitive inference if they see objects or pictures. So let's say I had some dolls, and instead of A, B, and C, I'll make up names. Let's start with A, B, and C. So I hold up 2 dolls, and I say, look, Alice is taller than Betty. And they can see, yeah, Alice is taller than Betty. So I put Alice down, I hold Betty, and I pick up Charlotte. Let's call her Charlotte. And I say, look, Betty is taller than Charlotte. And they say, yeah, they can see that. Betty is taller than Charlotte. Now, I don't directly pick up Alice and Charlotte, but they've seen the 3 dolls. And now if I ask them, hey, who's taller? I kind of just lay these dolls down. They're all kind of laid down in a little bin, let's say. And I say, who's taller, Alice or Charlotte? So I'm not letting them directly compare them, but they can figure it out because they've seen it. They've seen that when they saw that Alice was taller than Betty and that Betty was taller than Charlotte, they can figure the logic out. But if I do this same problem just mentally with the same kid, like the same age kid, and I talk about, I got 3 friends. Alice is taller than Betty. And you know what? I also have another friend, Charlotte, and Betty's taller than Charlotte. Hey, who do you think's taller, Alice or Charlotte? They don't get it. So this is why it's called concrete operations. If they need something in front of them to enable them to use logic. So this is why we say they can't think abstractly or hypothetically. They can't just imagine situations and perform logic on them. 2 advances during the stage are reversibility and classification. Reversibility is the ability to reverse mental operations, meaning to they can mentally think about undoing something that was just done. So this is one of the reasons they can pass those conservation tasks now. They can mentally reverse what's been done. So when you pour the water from the small cup into the taller skinny cup, they can think to themselves, hey, I could pour it back into that first cup, and it would look the same as it used to. So they can kind of reverse the operations. Or when you pull those quarters apart, they can think to themselves, because they have reversibility, they can think, hey, I could push them right back where they used to be, and I already saw that they have the same number. Okay, that is, so once again, that's called reversibility. It's one of the things that allows them to solve those conservation tasks. They also, I'm going to add another thing that they do, they decenter now. I talked about centration with the younger children. In this third stage, they decenter, meaning that they have the ability to think about more than one aspect of a situation at a time, more than one dimension of a problem. And we saw that with that one girl that solved the water problem. She decentered. She thought about that the glasses were different widths. She said one was skinny and one was fatter or wider, I think she said. And that was her decentering, thinking there's it's not just the height, there's another difference here. Okay, and as mentioned here, they also advance in their classification skills. And classification just means the ability to organize objects into hierarchical conceptual categories. The ability to organize objects into hierarchical conceptual categories. And we need a hierarchical conceptual category is something like, let's say we break living things into, you can break living things into animals and I don't know, trees or plants, I should say, animals and plants. And then you can break animals down into mammals and I don't know what else, fish and birds. And then you can break those categories down. There's different types of birds, there's blue jays and robins. And then you could even probably break that down. There's probably some specific types of blue jays or robins. And anyways, like, it's that's a hierarchical classification system. It's like you split things into big categories, and you divide up those categories, and you can and children at this stage can categorize things like that. They can organize things like that. One way you see this is if you ever try playing the game of 20 questions with children. There's a huge difference between a pre-operational child versus a concrete operational child. At this stage, I mean, they're better at playing the game. They might start off by asking something like, is it alive? And then if it is, they might ask if it's a plant, and you might say no. And is it an animal? If you say yes, then they might ask if it's a mammal. So like they're basically working their way down the classification system. Whereas a pre-operational child, their first question might be, is it a fish? Like just an out of the blue question. Is it a rock? Okay, I mean, some just random guesses. So you see, if you ever play 20 questions with let's say a 9-year-old versus a 3-year-old, just to pick two ages. I mean, they have very different strategies. You'll see no logic with a 3-year-old, whereas the 9-year-old, because they have classification skills and they understand hierarchical relationships, they know how to kind of break down a category into smaller and smaller pieces, to try to get towards the answer. They're not great at it. They're not as good as the adolescents in the next stage, but you can see a real improvement in that game. Okay, let's go on. So the fourth and final stage is the formal operational stage. So now, and this is, when I say the final stage, I mean, Piaget believed that once you get to this stage, approximately around the age of 12 or later, you can, then this would be your final mode of thinking that you'll carry with you into adulthood. So, you might say, well, obviously a 24-year-old's a lot smarter than a 12-year-old or something like that. But what Piaget is pointing out is that they don't necessarily think differently. At some point in life, you're thinking, you don't like really change the way you think. You just kind of accumulate more facts and knowledge, and you do get smarter in that way. But you're using the same type of thinking that you used in adolescence, um, at least according to Piaget. So this is the final mode of thinking. Children or adolescents in the formal operational stage can understand hypothetical reasoning beyond the here and now. They're no longer tied to the concrete world like the earlier stage. So now they can understand logical concepts and abstract ideas, um, and and so you can give them, just worded problems that they can think about logically. And this is why what you see in adolescence is this is when people start to, think about things like the existence of a higher power, like God or whoever your higher power might be. I mean, whereas children don't really question that. I mean, children just kind of accept what they hear because it's too abstract. It's too and it's hypothetical. It's not something that's concrete in front of them. So it's in adolescence that you start to think, does this make sense or does this make sense? And they might start questioning things. They might start um, coming up with different beliefs than their parents do, or they will start to come up with different beliefs. Whereas children basically accept whatever the parents tell them. They think, that they can't even imagine their parents being any different than they are. Adolescents start to imagine, what if my parents were more like this or more like these other parents, or they start thinking about things like what ideal parents would be like. And so and all these are hypotheticals. It's like imagining things, and that's what separates this from the previous stage. These adolescents can engage in hypothetical deductive reasoning. This is Piaget's term, which is the ability to form hypotheses about how the world works and to reason logically. So they form hypotheses. The word hypotheses, is very, at least, in many ways, very similar to the word hypothetical, because hypotheses are hypotheticals, right? When you form a hypothesis, you're imagining what the what the solution might be to a problem. For instance, you might think of possible solutions. Maybe it's this, maybe it's this, and those are hypotheticals. Um, so concrete operational children cannot do that kind of logic, whereas these adolescents can. They can imagine possibilities and then think about them logically. Okay. Um, so this is where you start to develop more kind of scientific logical reasoning. Okay, and that kind of basically concludes the four stages in Piaget's theory in a nutshell. Um, one kind of offshoot idea, and this slide here is not Piaget. This comes from Elkind, and but it's connected to Piaget's ideas because Elkind talks about adolescent egocentrism. So he's using the same language and a similar concept to when Piaget talked about egocentrism back in the pre-operational stage. Remember that children see everything from their own viewpoint, and adolescent egocentrism is really is what Elkind says is kind of a reemergence of of I don't know, sorry, self-consciousness, I guess. Thinking about yourself, thinking about things the way you imagine them or see things. So he says it's kind of a reappearance of that, of egocentrism. This happens in two ways. One is the imaginary audience, and this is the belief that adolescents have that everyone is noticing them. So let's say you're in high school and you get a zit and you go to school with it, you basically go through the whole day thinking that everyone is looking at it and seeing it and noticing it. And even if it's, even if it is noticeable, what research shows is that we're not that aware of one another. And we don't care enough often about one another, about things like that with one another to even notice it. So I'll just mention they did an experiment where they had high schoolers wear a T-shirt to their class, and it was a T-shirt of it was a T-shirt of a singer. All of a sudden, Barry Manilow. It was I think it was Barry Manilow. Anyways, that was not considered popular among adolescents. Okay, this was Barry Manilow was somebody that my parents listened to. Okay, anyways, so imagine that you're as part of the experiment, you just have to wear the shirt to school, and they had these. So they had a number of people do this, and at different times, and then they had to estimate how many of their classmates do they think noticed the Barry Manilow T-shirt they were wearing. And their estimates typically ranged around 90%, that basically saying that everyone noticed it. And then they would actually ask the classmates, and did you notice what shirt John was wearing? And the actual percentage was more like 10% that actually noticed that he was wearing a Barry Manilow T-shirt. So it just kind of showed the disparity that we believe that 90% of people are noticing something about us, but really it's only about 10% of people. This is pointing out the imaginary audience idea. We believe that we're on stage, that people are watching us, that people are noticing everything about us. And so if somebody, let's say they act up a little bit in class, they think that everyone's watching them and kind of laughing along, and really most people are not paying attention to that person. Okay, that's one part of adolescent egocentrism. The second part is the personal fable. And this is the conception that your life is unique and special, and much more so than anyone else's life, or at least much more so than most others' lives. So you might have a conception during adolescence that, I really understand my friend Bob really well. I get him, but he couldn't possibly understand me because of the kind of life I've lived, and like my upbringing and my parents, and kind of like there's so many things that make your life much more unique than Bob's, and this is a very typical finding that adolescents often think they understand their friends or their peers more than their friends or peers understand them. And you can understand why that comes about. I mean, limited details about other people's lives, and so it seems easier to understand them based on the limited details, whereas tons of details about your own life, all the little nuances and what happened when you were 5 and this and that, and so because our memories of our own lives have so many more details and so much richer than what we know about others, we think that our lives are special. So because of the personal fable, adolescents believe that they have a sense of uniqueness. It also transfers to them, often believing that events and certain negative events are less likely to happen to them because they're somehow special. And I mean, it's not really, they wouldn't necessarily phrase it that way, but But if you ask them questions about how likely are they to, I don't know, get in an accident if while driving or something, and they might say, well, I'm a much better driver than others my age, so it's very unlikely for me, but I could understand other people my age getting into accidents. So one common occurrence is that they underestimate certain dangers, like, how likely are you to produce a pregnancy if you have unprotected sex? And adolescents will often just kind of fluff that off, that that's the kind of thing that happens to others. That would happen to to those adolescents that are really um, much more sexually active. They're might happen to the whores or the, sorry, maybe I shouldn't use that word, but I mean that might be the kind of thing that an adolescent is. And whereas me, no, it bad things happen to others, but that would never happen to me. Um, and it's this is obviously a little bit of illogical thinking, and this is what Elkind points out when with this adolescent egocentrism, even though you're in Piaget's fourth stage, it can show up in certain negative ways during adolescence. Okay, that's enough of that. This is the final slide of this section. Um, and I don't want to go into detail with this critique, but I'll mention a few things. First of all, the ages and stages of Freud's theory are not necessarily accurate. We now know that children can show abilities that Piaget said they did not have yet, at certain ages. If they can actually show them if you simplify the task that's being used to test for that ability. Let me give you an example. Piaget had what's called a seriation task, Seriation, seriation. That just means seriation just means ordering things. So one of his tasks was he would give them 6 sticks of different lengths, and they're just all like jumbled up to begin with in no particular order, and they have to put them in order from the tallest stick to the shortest stick. And pre-operational children really struggle with that task. You give them 6 different size sticks, and they move them around, because once again they're kind of doing more trial and error. They're not yet operational, and they basically fail that task. They can't put 6 different size sticks in order. But it turns out that if you just give them 3 sticks of different heights, they get it. And what researchers point out is that it's the same task, whether it's 3 or 6 sticks. It's the same logic basically. So they can do it with 3. It means that they have that logical ability. It's just 6 is too many for them. So anyways, I mean, there are people that tried simplified tasks to demonstrate that they actually gain certain logical abilities before Piaget said they did, based on these simplified tasks. Okay, stages are not necessarily distinct from one another. So anyway, sorry, just to finish off that first point. So there are a number of things that we know now occur earlier than what Piaget said. In the next video, I'm going to talk about the concept of object permanence. Remember, Piaget said 8 to 12 months. We'll see some evidence that perhaps it occurs earlier, using different tasks to test it. Okay, so second point, stages are not necessarily distinct from one another. Research finds plenty of examples of children that seem to operate in 2 stages at once. Piaget's theory was they would kind of leap from a tadpole to a frog. They would leap from one stage of thinking to another. It seems like it's not quite that. They're not quite so discrete from one another. So there's examples of people, like you give them one task and they demonstrate pre-operational thinking. You give them a different task and they demonstrate concrete operational thinking. This shouldn't occur according to Piaget's original theory, but there are lots of examples they find of people, kind of showing abilities in more than one stage at a time. And finally, Piaget believed his theory was universal, that it would apply to children all around the world in every culture. But it turns out that the culture does make a real difference. Different skills are important, more or less important in different cultures. So, as an example, there's a certain culture where children start learning about pottery from a very young age because it's essential to that particular culture. So, those pre-operational children that have been, learning about pottery from a young age, when you give them two balls of clay and you mash one down, they know it's the same amount of clay because they've been handling clay since they were young children. So they don't fail that test because their experience in that particular culture has taught them that particular kind of conservation, that the amount's not going to change no matter what you do with the clay. So particular experiences will teach different logical abilities in different cultures, depending once again what's important to the culture and what they learn from a young age. So it's not quite true that children go through the same stages at the same ages in every culture. What is true though is that the stages certainly don't switch places. You could still say that every child still progresses through the stages, but the ages might change, and once again, they don't always leap from one stage to another. Okay, that is Piaget, and that is the end of video 1 of chapter 7.